Hello everyone. What if the calmest places held the darkest secrets? Tonight, I've got two chilling stories that will make you rethink what you thought was safe. In our first story, a peaceful camping trip turns into a nightmare when something sinister rises from the lake. In the second, a quiet life near the woods is shattered when something begins watching from the shadows, and it's far from human. What would you do if you encountered the unknown? Stay tuned and leave your thoughts below. Do you believe these are just coincidences, or is there something more lurking out there? It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. Ethan, Sarah, Matt, and Olivia had been planning this camping trip for weeks. We wanted something simple, just a few days by the lake, surrounded by towering trees and the sound of the wind whispering through the leaves. It was supposed to be peaceful. But that's the thing about nature, right? It can be beautiful one moment and then, out of nowhere, turn into something you can't escape. The road leading to the campsite was quiet, the kind of quiet where every bump in the road feels like it's echoing in your chest. As we arrived at Lake Tahoe, the sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with an orange glow. The water was calm, almost too calm, like a mirror reflecting the fading light. I remember thinking, this is perfect. The air was warm, the smell of pine trees filled my lungs, and I could feel the tension leaving my body. Olivia, always the adventurous one, suggested we dive right into the water. The lake's warm, she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Matt was hesitant, but Sarah, with her usual carefree spirit, was quick to strip down and wade in. The cool water lapped at their legs, the perfect escape from the heat. I stayed behind to start the campfire. We had gathered a decent amount of wood, but for some reason, the fire just wouldn't catch. I couldn't get it to light no matter how hard I tried. Matt, always the outdoorsman, stepped in and took over. As I watched him struggle with the matchstick, a sudden scream sliced through the air. It was Olivia. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat. Olivia was flailing in the water, her body thrashing violently as if something was pulling her under. "What's happening?" Matt shouted, but I couldn't answer. My legs moved before my brain could catch up, and I sprinted toward the water. I waded in as fast as I could, the water cold against my legs. It wasn't deep, but when I reached Olivia, her eyes were wide with panic. "I can't breathe," she gasped. But before I could reach her, I felt a sharp, icy grip tightening around my ankle. Something was pulling me down, harder and harder, like a vice. My heart pounded in my chest as I kicked violently, forcing myself free from whatever had latched onto me. I gasped for air as I scrambled back to the shore, my heart racing and my mind screaming that we needed to get out of that water. But when I turned to look at Olivia, her face was pale, her body trembling as if she had seen something even worse than I had. We didn't speak, couldn't speak. We just ran, as fast as our legs could carry us, back to the campfire. The night had only just begun, but the terror had already found us. We stumbled back to the campsite, our breath ragged and our hearts still racing. The night was closing in, the shadows around us growing deeper, swallowing everything in their path. Olivia and Sarah were silent, their eyes darting nervously between the water and the woods beyond. Matt and I didn't know what to say. We couldn't explain what had just happened. The sensation of something alive gripping my ankle still felt like it was burned into my skin. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a freak accident, a freakish eel, or a fish maybe. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. It didn't feel like anything I had ever experienced. We huddled around the campfire, the warmth offering little comfort as we cracked open a couple of beers, trying to laugh it off. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows across the forest, and for a while, the silence was our only company. But then, a sound, a splash. It came from the lake. Matt and I froze. The girl stiffened beside us. It was too far out to see anything, but we all heard it. A splash, followed by another. It wasn't the kind of sound a fish makes when it jumps. It was different, heavy, like someone or something was walking through the water. "Maybe it's a deer," Matt suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. But we all knew it wasn't a deer. We grabbed our flashlights and headed toward the water's edge, our footsteps crunching on the dry leaves beneath us. We shined the beams of light across the surface, scanning the still lake. And then, just as we were about to turn back, the beam caught something. A figure. No, not a figure, an object. It was a head. I froze, my stomach dropping. It was as if a pair of glowing eyes were staring right through us, locked in place, unmoving. And then it rose. The figure in the lake moved, slowly, methodically, as if it had all the time in the world. Matt and I stood frozen, the beam of light from our flashlights shaking in our hands. The eyes, those eyes never left us. They were wide, glowing like two yellow orbs in the dark, and they pierced right through us. My heart hammered in my chest, but I couldn't look away. It wasn't just a head anymore. The thing rose further, its body breaking the surface of the water, and I could make out the outline of something long and slick, like a serpent, but bigger. My mind screamed for me to move, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. Suddenly, Matt whispered, "We need to go, now." I didn't need to be told twice. We turned and ran, our feet slamming into the ground as we sprinted back toward the campsite. My breath came in short, desperate gasps, and I could hear the girls behind us, panic whispers in the dark. The crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot felt like it was amplified 1,000 times in the silence of the woods. We reached the campsite in what felt like seconds, and I could see the fear in Olivia's eyes as we all huddled together. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, feeling a cold sweat form on the back of my neck. "But we're getting out of here." Matt grabbed the keys, his hands shaking, and we all quickly started packing up. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on us, and I swear I could feel something watching, waiting. We ran, not daring to look back. But I swear, I heard something following us, something moving beneath the water. We didn't stop until we were in the car, driving fast, the headlights cutting through the darkness. We never spoke of the thing in the water again, but we all knew one thing for sure: whatever it was still out there. The drive back was silent, the only sound the hum of the engine and the tires on the gravel road. None of us spoke. The air felt heavier now, like it had been thickened by whatever we'd just seen. Every turn, every shadow in the trees outside the car seemed to be hiding something that wasn't human. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but every explanation felt inadequate. When we finally reached the safety of Matt's car, the adrenaline started to wear off, and a cold dread seeped into my bones. We made a plan to return the next morning, to collect our things and figure out what to do next. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that the lake still had a claim on us. But that morning, when we drove back with my dad to collect our gear, the campsite looked different. The once calm spot by the lake was completely destroyed. The tents were shredded, their seams ripped open like they'd been torn apart by something with claws. Our coolers were tossed across the site, one overturned with its contents scattered. The fire pit was smothered with dirt and ash, the charred logs broken in half. Matt and I stood frozen, staring at the wreckage. The camp was unrecognizable, as though something had rampaged through it, and then it hit me. Thing from the lake wasn't just watching us. It had been there. It had come to the shore. I could still feel the sting in my ankle, the deep gash from when it grabbed me. I lifted my pant leg, and there it was, just like I remembered. But now, it felt like a warning, something that had left its mark. I told my dad everything about the creature in the lake, the eyes, the terror, but he just shook his head, looking confused. "I don't know what to tell you, son," he said, and we left quickly, not looking back. We never went back to that lake. None of us did. It's been months since that night by the lake, but the memory hasn't faded. It's like it's seared into my mind, always there in the background, creeping up when I least expect it. I still remember the feeling of the cold grip around my ankle, the weight of whatever it was pulling me down. But what really haunts me now is the look in Olivia's eyes when we ran from the shore. She had seen something I'm not sure she even wants to talk about. She never did. The nightmare didn't end that night, though. After we left, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, there was something in the water, something ancient and dangerous. Something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. And I couldn't stop thinking about what it could have been. A couple of weeks later, I tried to call Matt to talk about it, but he didn't answer. I left him a message, but he never called me back. It wasn't like him. I thought maybe he was just shaken up, avoiding the subject. Maybe he was trying to forget. But then, a few weeks after that, I got a strange text from him. It was short and to the point. "It's still out there. I don't think we were supposed to see it." That was the last message I ever got from Matt. I tried calling again, but there was no response. I even drove out to his place, nothing. No sign of him. The worst part is, I started to wonder if the thing we saw in the lake, whatever it was, wasn't just confined to the water. I started hearing things scratching noises outside my house at night, and once, when I looked out the window, I could have sworn I saw something watching me from the edge of the trees. but when I blinked, it was gone. I haven't gone back to the lake, and I don't plan to. But whatever it is, I know it's still out there. The days after Matt disappeared were filled with nothing but unanswered questions and a creeping unease that refused to let go. It was as if a shadow had settled over everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there by the lake wasn't finished with us. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The whole situation felt wrong. I decided to go back. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was just a desperate need for closure. But I couldn't live with the questions anymore. I needed answers, even if I didn't know what I'd find. So, one Saturday morning, I drove back to the site with my dad, hoping to find some clue that would explain what had happened to Matt. The campsite looked different this time. It was empty, as if no one had been there for months. The once torn tents had been cleared away, leaving nothing but patches of flattened grass. The woods seemed quieter, almost too quiet. There was no wind, no rustling leaves, just silence. But then, just beyond the tree line, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, half buried in the dirt, was the same cooler we'd left behind. The one that had been tossed across the campsite. It was scratched up, as if something had dragged it, but it wasn't just the cooler that caught my attention. On the ground around it, there were footprints. Large, deep prints, like something massive had been walking through the area. And then, in the dirt, I saw it, a claw mark, deep and fresh. I didn't stay much longer after that. Jake had always loved the quiet of the countryside. His house sat just on the edge of Asheville, North Carolina, surrounded by dense woods. The kind of place where the trees seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon, where the wind whispers secrets through the leaves. It was a haven for Jake and his girlfriend, Sophie. Weekends were spent walking their two dogs, Charlie and Max, through the thick forest, just them and nature. But things changed that night. It started out like any other. The four of them, Jake, Sophie, Charlie, and Max, were settling into their routine, enjoying the calm that only a rural night could provide. Sophie made dinner, the dogs lay at their feet, and the sounds of crickets filled the air. But as the hours passed, something began to shift. It was subtle at first. Charlie, usually calm, started pacing by the back door, his ears pinned back, his eyes darting around. Max followed suit, his tail tucked low, whining softly. "It's nothing," Jake assured Sophie, but his own nerves were beginning to tighten. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, a loud bark cut through the quiet house. It was Charlie, standing by the door, growling in a way Jake had never heard before. He walked over to him, gently opening the door, expecting to see nothing more than the usual shadows of the yard. But this time, the darkness felt different. It felt oppressive, as if the woods themselves were closing in on him. The wind had stopped, not a rustle in the trees, just absolute silence. But then came the sound, a snap, a crack, branches breaking, but not from the usual wind or animals. It was something bigger, something heavier moving through the woods. The hairs on Jake's neck stood up. "Charlie, come on," Jake muttered, stepping back inside, but Charlie's growls grew louder, more frantic, and that's when he saw it. A flicker of movement between the trees, too fast to catch, but enough to make his heart race. Someone was watching him. The calm had broken. Now, the terror had begun. Jake's heart raced as he closed the door behind him, feeling the weight of the silence settle heavily over the house. Sophie's face was filled with concern, her eyes scanning him as she stood by the kitchen. "What's wrong with them?" she asked softly, glancing toward the dogs. "They're not acting right," Jake muttered, his gaze locked on Charlie and Max, who were now both at the back door, their ears flat against their heads. They weren't barking anymore, but their posture was rigid, their bodies tense as if they were sensing something unseen. The unsettling stillness in the air pressed down on him. "It's probably nothing," Jake said, but even to him, his words didn't sound convincing. Before he could reach for the light switch, Charlie suddenly bolted for the door with a wild urgency, growling low and deep, a sound that chilled Jake's blood. Max was right behind him, but instead of following like usual, the dogs were heading straight for the woods at the edge of the yard. Jake hesitated only for a moment before running after them. "Sophie, stay inside," he shouted, his voice tight with panic. Jake threw open the door and stepped outside, the cold night air rushing in. The forest loomed dark and silent, an unsettling stillness settling over everything. The dogs were already at the tree line, and Jake's feet moved instinctively to follow, his flashlight barely cutting through the thick shadows of the woods. He hadn't gone far when he heard it soft at first, a crack in the underbrush, followed by the unmistakable sound of something moving in the trees. He froze. The dogs had stopped now, their heads turning slowly as if they were following something just out of sight. Then came the low growl, not from the dogs, but from something deeper in the woods. Jake's breath caught in his throat. They weren't alone. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he strained his ears to hear through the thick, oppressive silence. The growl echoed again, a low rumble coming from the darkness of the trees ahead. His breath caught in his throat, but his legs refused to stop moving. Charlie and Max were both eerily still now, staring into the darkness with unnerving intensity. The hairs on the back of Jake's neck stood up. Every step he took felt like it echoed louder than the last, but there was no sound, just the thick, suffocating silence of the forest. He lifted his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, but it was like trying to pierce through a wall. He couldn't see anything. Then, the beam caught something. Two glowing dots' eyes shining in the darkness. They were too high off the ground to be any kind of animal Jake had ever seen, and they didn't blink. They just stared, unblinking, watching him from the shadows. Jake's breath quickened, a cold sweat beating at the back of his neck. "Charlie, Max, come on," he called out, his voice trembling more than he wanted to admit. But the dogs didn't move. They were fixated on the eyes, their growls growing louder, deeper. The eyes blinked, and the creature shifted, stepping into the dim light. Jake's stomach churned. It wasn't an animal. It was something far worse. Then, the growl came again, louder, more threatening, and the creature stepped forward. Jake stood frozen, his body paralyzed with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The thing in front of him stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was savoring every second of the terror it was inflicting. The eyes, glowing with an eerie intensity, never left him. Charlie and Max were still growling, but there was something different about it now, something desperate, as though they, too, were beginning to sense the true danger of what they were facing. Jake slowly reached for his phone, hoping to call for help, but his fingers trembled too much to unlock it. The creature took another step forward, and that's when Jake saw it more clearly. Its shape was humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin. The limbs were unnaturally long, and the skin that was visible looked like pale, rough bark. The thing's face remained in shadow, but Jake could feel its eyes drilling into him, reading his every fear. Suddenly, the dogs lunged, breaking the spell of silence. They barked furiously, pulling at their leashes as if trying to charge at the creature. The thing's head turned sharply, and in the blink of an eye, it was gone, vanishing into the forest with inhuman speed, leaving only the sounds of the dog's frantic barks and Jake's ragged breathing behind. He stood there, unable to move, his mind racing. Had it just disappeared? Or was it still out there, waiting? Jake's heart was pounding so loud he thought it might drown out the sound of his breathing. He looked around frantically, trying to find any sign of the creature, but there was nothing, only the black, endless trees. The dogs were still tugging at their leashes, barking in the direction the thing had disappeared, but Jake felt frozen in place, his body locked in a cold, rigid fear. "What the hell was that?" he whispered to himself, his voice hoarse, barely a breath above the wind that had begun to stir again. He wanted to run, to get back to the house and lock the door behind him, but his legs wouldn't move. Max and Charlie suddenly stopped barking, their attention shifting to something else. Jake turned to look at them, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The dogs were staring down at the ground, their ears flat, their bodies tense. Then, Jake saw long, deep scratches in the dirt, as if something had clawed its way through the ground. The marks were too big to be made by an animal, and too fresh. They led further into the woods, vanishing into the darkness beyond. He took a hesitant step forward, and that's when the low growl came again. This time, it was closer, much closer. Jake's blood ran cold. It hadn't left. He didn't wait to see what would happen next. He ran. Jake ran as fast as his legs could carry him, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. Max and Charlie were barking wildly, pulling at their leashes, but he couldn't hear anything over the pounding of his heart. The trees seemed to close in on him, the darkness swallowing everything. Every rustling branch, every snap of a twig underfoot, felt like it was a step behind him, something chasing, something waiting. He glanced back over his shoulder, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a figure, just beyond the reach of his flashlight. It was tall, almost skeletal, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the shadows. His stomach churned as the realization hit him. It was still out there, still following him. He pushed harder, the sound of the dog's frantic barking urging him on, but the forest seemed endless, its oppressive weight suffocating. Every direction he turned, the path felt longer, darker, like he was running in circles. Suddenly, he stumbled, crashing to the ground with a sharp gasp. Max and Charlie were yanking at their leashes, growling and pulling him toward the trees. When Jake stood up, trying to catch his breath, he saw deep, twisted claw marks on the trunk of a nearby tree, still fresh. That's when he heard a faint, whispering voice, soft but unmistakable, coming from the darkness ahead. Jake. His blood ran cold. He wasn't alone. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. But now I want to know, have any of you ever encountered something that just couldn't be explained? Or maybe you've got your own spine-chilling story you'd like me to share? Drop it in the comments below, and who knows, it could be the next story featured here. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more mysterious tales. Until then, stay safe and watch your back.